World Autism Awareness Day was last Saturday, April 2nd, and I'm sure many of us are aware that the month of April is Autism Awareness Month. And a couple months ago, Adam asked me if I'd like to either do an activity or share something on the topic, and I told him I would love to. And my thoughts as they evolved on what I wanted to do to mark autism awareness at Castle, the more I saw these spiritual principles and lessons that we can apply as regards to our dealings with, our treatment of, and our ministry to people with autism as a church. So when I said that to Adam, I did mention that I wasn't looking to preach, but what Adam heard was, just kidding. So this is by no means a sermon. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a special education teacher. But I am an autism mom, and one of the things I love to do is share my experiences and the things that I've learned over the last 12 years in order to help people better understand what autism is and how it affects and impacts the lives of autistic people and their families as well. So autism, if you're not aware of what it is, it's a complex, lifelong developmental disability that typically appears during early childhood, and it can impact a person's social skills, communication, self-regulation, and autism is defined by a certain set of behaviors, and it's a spectrum condition, which means that it affects people differently and to varying degrees. So my husband Bob and I have 4 boys, and David is our third man-child, and he has autism spectrum disorder. David is 13. David is a fraternal twin, and he also, he has a lot to say. Because he's a twin, it was very easy to pick out the similarities between David and Micah, because it was like having a twin. It was like an instant measuring stick to see where he was developmentally. And David and Micah couldn't be more different. They are polar opposites. And we started to notice these developmental differences between David and Micah right away. Even within the first year, David was hitting milestones consistently, like 2 to 3 months behind Micah, like walking, crawling, talking. And then between 14 to 16 months, we started noticing more and more these behaviors that we just didn't understand. And if I'm being honest, these behaviors frightened me. I'd never seen it before because I didn't understand what was happening, so I was afraid. Some of the things that Bob and I noticed, David was very disconnected from everyone. He wouldn't make eye contact with people. He avoided social situations. We have a big, loud family, and he would constantly be seeking isolation upstairs where it was quiet. We noticed he was walking on his toes, which he still does to this day. That is very common in autism. He spoke no words. He only made sounds. He'd stand in front of the TV and twirl around in a circle on his toes, flapping his arms and waving his hands. And as a 16-month-old, I'd walk into his room, and he would just be sitting in the corner of his crib, looked like he was just completely zoned out, just chewing on his blanket. And I'd go in with this enthusiastic, "Good morning, David." And it was like he was just glazed over. He didn't even acknowledge that I was in the room with him. Not even like a flicker of eye contact. And I had super strong bonds with my other 3 boys, but it was like nothing with David. It was like he was totally locked up inside his own mind. And as a mom, that's super hard. So we took David to his pediatrician when he was 17 months old, and she diagnosed him with something called pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. Now, what that means is that at the time, to try to simplify it, PDD-NOS was one of the 5 subcategories of autism, But when the doctor started talking about PDD, NOS, I didn't know anything about autism. So I left the office probably more confused than I got there. Typically, clinicians won't screen for autism until the child is 18 months old. But at the time, David was only like 2 weeks away from turning 18 months old. So the doctor gave him the diagnosis, encouraged us to go get a second opinion in case a specialist could tweak the diagnosis. And so we were able to get him to see a neurodevelopmental pediatrician in Farmington, and she stuck with the original diagnosis. So the next few months were filled with appointments, specialists, setting ourselves up with early intervention with the Birth to 3 system of Connecticut. We knew we'd need lots of therapy in our home to teach him simple things, how to eat with utensils, how to drink from a cup, how to, even just a simple communication skill like pointing to something so I knew what he wanted. Occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy. It all seemed so overwhelming. And as a mother of 3 other boys and a wife and worship director at the church, and at the time, the other 3 boys were only 2, 4, and 6 years old. So it was very daunting. But my parents and my sisters and our church body helped us so much and prayed for us. And if it wasn't for their help and prayers, I don't know where our family would be today. Just incredible grace. I can't express enough. I truly don't know where our family would be today had it not been for the support and love of our family and our church family. And that's encouraging, right? Maybe you're not facing an autism diagnosis. Maybe you're facing a different diagnosis. Maybe you're staring down financial impossibility, or maybe you're up against depression and anxiety. All of these things can be so overwhelming. But that song we just sang, I'm going to see a victory, right? It says, the God I serve knows only how to triumph. My God will never fail, and he has never failed my family. So to say that David has come a long way doesn't begin to cover the strides he's made since he was diagnosed. He went from completely nonverbal and disengaged with no connection to anyone to just spontaneously greeting people as they walk in the room, showing empathy for others, which is a huge concept for the autistic mind to grasp, showing empathy and compassion for other people. He's reading, he's doing math. He navigates technology like he's the CEO of Apple. But probably my most favorite strength of David's is his musical ability. Just a really quick story. Recently, I was upstairs with David, and he wandered into Jacob's room, who has a keyboard. And he sat down at the keyboard, and he turned it on. He started playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, which is one of the songs he knows. And then he said, Mama's turn? And I said, all right, I'll take a turn. So I sat down, and I played one of his songs from his favorite show, Peppa Pig. And I played the chords and sang along to see what he would do. And then after, I played just the melody with one finger for him. And honest to goodness, I played it one time. And that was it. He played through it and figured out the pattern. And then the second time through, he played it near perfectly, pretty near perfect rhythm and singing along, even using the sustain pedal on the floor. So I'm like, okay, David. But that's the thing with autism. David can recite entire episodes of Dora the Explorer, even the scenes that are totally in Spanish. As a matter of fact, he actually uses Spanish interchangeably with English in everyday conversation. He'll shout at our puppy Molly, "Abajo, Molly, abajo!" So he's teaching us Spanish. But yet there's other things he can't do, like brush his teeth on his own. He knows lyrics to countless songs, but he's unable to help himself get clean after using the bathroom. He can identify, this blows my mind, he can identify Bob's former place of employment from when he was like 3 years old. When we drive by, he says, "Daddy's work?" He's 13 now. So he has an incredible memory. Yet he can't tie his shoes yet. We're not there yet. He has a difficult time. This is probably the biggest struggle. He has a difficult time adapting to the slightest change in his schedule. So figuring out autism has been a journey for clinicians and patients alike that has been decades long. Unfortunately, even as recent as 40 years ago, people like David would have been institutionalized. Clinicians have been baffled by autism and its complexities for years. Thankfully, the United States began the decades-long process of deinstitutionalizing patients with disabilities in the 1970s, and it's taken decades. When we think of autism, many of us think of the puzzle piece logo, which originated in the 1960s. And the symbol stemmed from the idea that autism was a puzzling condition. The original image showed a crying child inside a puzzle piece to represent the sadness of the burden that autism was considered to put on a family and the child. And there are differing opinions. This is just, I wanted to say this because it's good to learn, right? Like Adam was saying. There are differing opinions on the puzzle piece logo. Many autistic people find it to be offensive because it insinuates, you can put up the next one, Heather, it insinuates that there's something missing from their lives, that they don't quite measure up to normal standards, that somehow they're incomplete. Some autistic people have rejected the puzzle piece and have embraced the infinity loop, which represents the neurodiversity movement. Neurodiversity means basically all different ways of thinking, all different types of minds, not just one set way. So it includes the total spectrum of neurodivergent and neurotypical people. Neurotypical people would, to simplify it, would be non-autistic people. It shows the world that there are neurological differences, and that's normal in society, and it's a natural occurrence among human beings and more commonplace than we realize. Many people are moving away from certain slogans like Light It Up Blue for autism awareness, and instead they're using the hashtag Red instead, which signals a fuller, more complete awareness of autism, which is not just, this is huge for me, which is not just awareness, but acceptance and inclusion. Did you know that there are non-autistic people in positions of authority making decisions regarding topics that directly affect autistic people without even considering and consulting them, without listening to their needs and desires and ideas, without taking into consideration their personal experiences? These people want their voices heard. An entire sector of the autistic community has adopted the phrase, nothing about us without us. Nothing about us without us. And this phrase was originally a Latin phrase, and it was a slogan that's actually been around for hundreds of years, and the first people that used it were in Central Europe, and they were using it because they simply wanted a say in how they were governed. It's used to communicate the idea that no policy should be decided by any representative without the full and direct participation of members of the group affected by that policy. But for so long, there's been an assumption that people with atypical disabilities couldn't advocate for themselves because they're less than, or their atypical abilities are inferior to typical abilities. There's a name for that assumption. It's called ableism. It's a form of discrimination. It characterizes people as being defined by their disabilities and inferior to the non-disabled. When David was first diagnosed, I told you, I knew nothing about autism. But honesty here, my ignorance which was a product of what society told me what autism was, caused me to believe that there was something wrong with my son. That as his mom, I needed to do everything I could to try to fix him. And I was heartbroken because I thought his life would be terrible. In the early days of our journey with autism, I used to pray for David from a place of fear and panic. As the dust settled and time went by, I started educating myself. And when the light bulb came on, I realized that David didn't need fixing. I realized that there was nothing wrong with him, that just because he flaps his arms and jumps up and down in place in the grocery store doesn't mean he's broken, right? That's him expressing his excitement or trying to regulate his feelings about being in this chaotic grocery store. As Christ followers, we need to remember, and we know that God created the heavens and the earth, that according to his word, he created every living creature on the land, air, and sea. The Bible tells us that he created Adam and Eve, that we are created in the image of God. We also know from God's word that he's all-knowing, that he's perfect, and he doesn't make mistakes. So if God doesn't make mistakes, then God created David exactly the way he intended David to be. No mistakes were made. When this light bulb came on for me, I remember being both a little sad, but also relieved. I was sad because I had to come to terms with the fact that there was no miracle cure for my son, but I also felt an incredible sense of relief that I, as his mother, didn't have to live in a state of panic and crisis trying to fix him. It was then that I started to pray for him differently. Instead of praying for him to be fixed, I started praying that God would help him to attain all the skills and the tools that he needs in order to fulfill his purpose here on this earth. Because we're all created for a divine purpose, right? I pray every night for David that God would fill him with God's Holy Spirit and that the fruit of God's Spirit would pour from his life and minister to the people who spend time with him every day. And that by being with David, because he's filled with the Holy Spirit, that people would encounter God just from being around David. Nothing to do with David, God's Spirit in David. And ultimately, as Christ followers and as a church, that's what we're here for anyway. Having said all that, autism does come with a lot of hardship and struggle. One of David's sensory triggers is hearing babies cry. So this can make simple tasks, like going to the grocery store, very difficult. I remember one instance, we were going on a trip. I'm just scrolling because I'm trying to paraphrase this. I don't want to go too long. We were going on a trip in 2015, and I needed to go to the store to get some essentials. Bob was working. I couldn't find anyone to just stay at the house with David, so I had to bring him with me. It was supper time, usually the busiest time of the grocery store. I got there. I took all 4 boys with me thinking if something goes terribly wrong, at least the other 3 can try to help me with whatever. So I went through that store. I was like laser focused. I'm like bobbing and weaving through the crowds, going as fast as I can to get deodorant and all the stuff that we needed for the trip. And we made it without any incidents to the register. And I was like, home stretch. We're almost there. And then all of a sudden, this woman with a crying baby got behind us in line. And the 5 of us were standing there, and I was like, oh, Lord Jesus, please help. Please be with us. I know you're here with me. Just help. And David started to get a little aggressive. It started to escalate more and more. And he was pinching, doing the things. And all of a sudden, he started to really, it was escalating quicker than I could keep up with. The boys sprang into action, started loading our stuff out in the conveyor belt, and it was getting worse and worse and worse. And I get it. I've been the mom in the grocery store with a screaming baby because it's nap time or he's starving or, it's I've been there, so it's hard. But then, it just got to a point where I was like, something's got to give. So I looked at the woman and I tearfully said, "Ma'am, I'm so sorry to have to ask you, but I wondered if it would be possible. My son has autism spectrum disorder. One of his triggers is hearing babies cry. Is it at all possible for you to maybe move to another lane a little further away from us so that he doesn't hurt himself or others?" Because clearly she could see he was upset. And she looked me in the face and said, "I'm not moving." So I said, "All right, we're doing this." So I said, "All right, let's go as fast as we can." And it just got to a point where he started, my arms were bleeding. He partially ripped my shirt off. And I looked at this woman, mascara coming down my face. And I said, "Ma'am, please." I was desperate. I felt like I'd been beat up. And she finally moved, but it was like to the very next checkout line. So it didn't really make a huge difference. But at that point, it was too far. So we left, and I contemplated calling security or somebody to come and help, but it didn't really. It was just AJ. I remember, you might not even remember this, but AJ was 8, maybe 9. But AJ had to actually get into the cart so that I could use my debit card. Got on top of him to hold him so that I could do what I needed to do. And that was when he started to do all the things that I was bleeding and all of that. So that's the struggle. That's the struggle that people with autism are up against and their families. And the only reason I tell that story is if you're in the grocery store and you see someone behaving in a way that doesn't seem appropriate for public, just stop and think about the cause of the behavior and what might actually be going on in that person's life that's caused it. And it's not just grocery stores. We may not realize it, but neurodivergent people come into this building all the time. They may seem normal to us. They may seem aloof. But people with autism are keenly observant and very tuned in. They may not always understand what we say to them, but a lot of times they do. But what they will always understand is how we make them feel, how we treat them, how we speak to them. Even if they don't particularly understand what we're saying, they'll always understand how we make them feel. And as a church body, we have the opportunity to learn about people on the spectrum in order to love them and care for them more fully. One of the best ways to understand autism and the autistic mind is to spend time with people on the spectrum. Listen to them, observe them. Listening and observing are the starting point. Meet them right where they are in their world. That might seem oversimplified, but if you think about it, that's what Jesus did, right? He spent time with marginalized people who were misunderstood and assigned a label. He listened to them and he observed them and he understood where they were coming from. He loved them unconditionally. And if we want to model our lives after the life of Jesus, we will absolutely do the same. Not just within the walls of this building, but in our communities. And as I wrap up, I wanted to offer a couple of tips to parents, if I may. I want to encourage you to encourage your kids to ask questions about autism. There's absolutely nothing wrong with asking questions. I used to dread when someone would ask me a question about autism. I still feel completely like Linnell probably could have done a way better job at this today, but it's so important to ask questions. And if your kid asks you a question about autism, you may not know the answer, But that's okay. You can say something like, I'm not really sure about that, but let's find out. Let's learn. Let's learn about autism together and go from there. Another tip to parents, humans learn through observation, and kids are no exception. So if your young child is watching someone in the community who's behaving differently than them, do not discourage it. I know that sounds kind of counter to what we do as parents. Encourage them to ask questions about what they're seeing. As a parent of a child asking these questions, it can feel awkward and embarrassing, especially if your child's asking the question in a very indiscreet way, like, Dad, why is that kid doing this? That's hard in the store. But in that moment, you don't want to make that child feel bad for asking a question. Before I had David, before I knew how to handle those situations, I remember as a new-ish mom whispering to AJ and Jacob in the store, don't stare at people who are different from you, it's rude. But that's how children learn, right? They observe things, and that's how they learn about them. As David got older, I made that connection, and from there on out, I started using kids observing David in the community as an opportunity to help them understand. And it would go something like this. I don't know if this helps parents of young children or not, but if I noticed a child staring, if the parent seemed approachable or open to dialogue, I'd address both the parent and the child, not just the child, because that could be weird, but just address the parent and the child and say, how you doing? This is my son, David. He moves his body and makes sounds that might seem strange to you, but David has something called autism, which is basically another way of thinking. How simple is that? It's just another way of thinking. That way of thinking causes him to move his body and make sounds that are different from other people, and is totally okay, but I can see why it would seem strange to you. So those are just a couple tips. So in conclusion, I just want to say I'm so grateful for this church body. I know when David is here, I don't have to worry about getting the dirty looks because he's loud while Adam's preaching. This church loves me. This church loves my family. And they love each other and just in a radical, unconditional way. And I know that as we continue to grow, there will be more and more people who come in with different needs in the realm of neurodiversity. And as a church body, we can always learn how to care for all people more effectively based on their needs. Eventually, I would love to see adapted programming for kiddos with autism in conjunction with Castle Kids, or years ago, Bob and I had the idea to have like a sensory or a quiet room if there's a kid that's struggling in the service and needs to get where it's quiet, just to get a break. And I know these things will happen in God's timing and according to his economy, because we know these types of things take money and resources. But I'm convinced that as we grow and we have more opportunities to accommodate more diverse needs, God will provide as we are faithful to him. As we're faithful to give to him, he will provide for these needs. So that's all I have right now, but I wondered if David has anything to say this morning. David, do you have something to tell us? Yeah, come on up. Come on up. Give Micah your hoodie. Look at that face. What do you want to say?
Hi, David.
Hi, David. Thank you.
Thank you.
I love you.
I love you.
Do you want to pray?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay.
Yes.
How do you pray?
Our Father,
Our Father,
who art in heaven,
who art in heaven,
hallowed be my name.
hallowed be thy name.
the kingdom come,
Thy kingdom come,
come, thy will be done
thy will be done
on earth
on earth
as it is in heaven.
as it is in heaven. You want some more? Give us this day.
Give us this day our daily bread.
Our daily bread. Do you want to skip to the end?
Yes.
For thine
For thine
is the kingdom
kingdom and the power and the glory forever
forever
and
and
ever.
ever.
Amen.
Amen. Stephen, high five. See you later. That's it. All right, that's it.
Make miracle walk, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. We make miracle walk, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. We make miracle work, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. We make miracle work, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, walking in this place. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, turning life around. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, working miracles. I worship you, I worship you, because you are make miracle rock, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are, we make miracle rock, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are, we make miracle work, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, turning life around. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, working miracles. I worship you, I worship you, because you are way make miracle walk, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are, way make miracle walk, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. That is who you are. That is who you are. you walk. Even when I don't feel it, you walk it. You never stop walking. You never stop walking. Even when I don't see it, you walk it. Even when I don't feel it, you walk it. You never stop walking. You never stop walking. Oh, even when I don't see it, you work. Even when I don't feel it, you walk it. You never stop working. You never stop. You never stop working. You never stop walking. Waymaker, miracle walker, promise keep, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle walker, promise keep, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 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 Oh, healer's who you are. Healer's who you are. Healer's who you are. Healer's who you are. Provider's who you are. Provider's who you are. Provider's who you are. God is who you are. Healer's who you are. Healer's who you are. Healer's who you are. God is who you are. Oh, waymaker, miracle walk, promise keep, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle walk, promise keep, light in the